All right. Well, I want to be mindful of the time because we have a lot to cover. And both Robin and I could talk about media literacy for like the next until the end of quarantine. So we want
Until the end of time.
until the end of time. It's my favorite subject, and I know folks will keep coming in. And I want to acknowledge that since Robin and I are both based in Oakland, which is Ohlone land, and just take a moment to acknowledge that as well. And just also take a moment to take a deep breath as we're all sort of navigating like a very uncertain world and an uncertain future. And that's really what brought us together today, was just the amount of media that we are all ingesting and consuming. And for those of us with families, like this new form of education that's online as well, and wanting to sort of facilitate a conversation to give us some frameworks to navigate this. I mean, we've all been overwhelmed with media for a long time, but this quarantine has definitely, I think, brought to light a lot of a sense of like another level of panic and overwhelm of like how do we support the families in our lives, how do we support our own mental health and well-being while trying to like navigate all of the different forms of media that are out there. So I want Robin to introduce herself, and then I can talk a little bit more about who I am, though I think everybody on here knows me already, but also what Real Stories does and how we ground media literacy. So Robin, you want to?
Yeah, so my name is Robin Bykofsky. I'm Oakland based. I have about 20 years experience working with Bay Area, mainly young people in media arts, music, theater, education, and really around figuring out how to elevate voices that are often misrepresented and underrepresented in media and just kind of across the board in arts and whatnot. Also, I have been, I was a staff sound engineer at Berkeley Rep. I've done some sound design for very independent films that I've screened across the world. I've worked in organizations such as the UC Theaters education program. There's a music venue in downtown Berkeley, Youth Uprising, and 9th Street Independent Film Center, all doing this work that working with young people, merging them in the arts, whatnot. Also, my other hats that I wear is I've been a producer for documentary film. I'm currently finishing up a documentary film that looks at immigrant and refugees navigating through the healthcare system and how integrative, culturally responsive integrative medicines help community heal themselves from trauma. And hopefully it will be out shortly and will be premiering at SF Doc Fest. That's something. I'll throw links to the film. And then prior to that, I was co-producer of a documentary about a local Ohlone woman, Karina Gould, called Beyond Recognition. That's actually helped a lot in the activism work that she's done around her land trust and saving Berkeley Shell Mound and whatnot. So that's me. And yeah, I'm very much, I've been doing media literacy work since I think 1999 when I was still an undergrad, and was introduced to it, and it really helped me frame a lot of the feelings that I had from consuming media, and it gave me a language and framework to take my like anger and confusion of the world around me, and was all like, oh, this is actually really cool. There's actually something to, to think this through, and I'm not the only one that has had these thoughts and whatnot. So I thought that, to spend this time to kind of, what really hoping that people will get out of it is big, like language and framework around how to generate discussion around media usage, especially now in which we are constantly engaged with it and saturated to a point that it could be overwhelming, and particularly amongst families, maybe a little people you live with, a little difficult and challenging conversations that might happen around media usage and whatnot. Also, the purpose is to give people some tools to be able to improve one's skills in becoming a critical and compassionate consumer and producer of media, because we are all consumers and we're all producing media whether we like it or not, or think we are. So we just like give ourselves credit for actually all of us are producing media of some sort or another. And then the improve overall communication with family members or whoever you're sheltered in place with around this, so we're not so pointing fingers and nitpicky, but actually having a better understanding about how others might be interpreting media and how they're using it. And that's where that compassion piece comes in, and patience, and maybe it'll just bring people's, you know, blood pressure down a little bit with things. So and then before kind of jumping in, I was wondering if anyone had any kind of big questions that they had or things that they were thinking about, and I can try and tailor the conversation around some of the thoughts that you all were having coming in.
Just to kind of talk about how this works, you can always just unmute yourself, but also you can use that Allie, our program manager, is here and she's moderating the chat. So if any questions come up, she can, you know, interject to like help us, you know, move in that direction. We're hoping that this will be like a really interactive conversation, not just.
Yeah, I'm not a lecturer. I hope not. I could talk a lot, but I don't like being a lecturer. I am going to just put the links into the films that that I produced in the chat, just so folks have it. All right. Well, we're just going to jump right in. No, we'll go and talk a little bit. Do you want it about Real Girls or
Real Stories?
Yeah, Real Stories.
Absolutely. So I'm just going to share a screen, and I mean, I think most folks are pretty familiar with what we do, but you know, we are a film program for girls and non-binary folks based here in the Bay Area. Well, we are based here in the Bay Area, but we, you know, have pivoted pretty quickly since shelter in place, and now all of our programming is online, which is also another reason why Robin and I started having these conversations, as we are moving towards not only having all of our education being like consumed online, but we also want our, you know, our marginalized folks to feel like they can be content creators and feel really empowered in that way. So what, you know, this whole sharing the screen thing is hard for me. So, you know, at Real Stories, we believe that when women, girls, and non-binary folks are better represented behind the scenes of the media, they'll be better represented on the screen. And what that really means is that for us, our mission is to change the demographics of who's making our media, whether that's our directors, our sound engineers, above the line and below the line. So we really train the next generation of filmmakers through year-round programming. And in a lot of different ways that, you know, from middle school youth to now college-aged media content creation and job placement opportunities, ideally in person, but now it's mostly over online. You know, and our mission, again, is to build a path to equity in the film and media industries. That we know that even with the cultural conversation that has shifted around the lack of representation in film, the numbers have not changed. And in fact, they've actually sort of backslid in some areas. And that there has been sort of a backlash post the Me Too Time's Up movement of hiring holds to more women and more marginalized folks. And we also know that when you have women and people of color and people who identify as LGBTQIA in positions of leadership, that they often hire more diverse crews. So the best way to create more diversity and equity is to put those people in leadership positions, and not just one person, but groups of them. So we really want to train them so that they're ready for those jobs, because we know that anybody who is not a white male is going to have to work twice as hard to get into those positions. And my background is that I've been working in film since I was 16 years old. I got to direct my first commercials when I was still in high school. I was hooked immediately, and I spent the majority of my career as I was the youngest visual effects producer in Los Angeles, and then I moved up here to work for Pixar for about 10 years, where I was often the only woman in the room. And really seeing that, especially the films at Pixar, and especially, and films that I worked on in visual effects are often seen by billions of people, and they're made by the same person. And I really wanted to figure out how to change that. And really, in this day and age, having empowered, confident, and connected women and girls who know their voice and vision matter will not only create media, but it will also shift gender inequality on a national stage, because we don't make widgets when we're making media. We're making films, we're exporting our culture, we're able to create and connect with humanity on a much broader level than in any other way. And so when those opportunities are really limited to people who are not the majority, we have, they're not even the majority anymore, but they're not limited to other just white males. We're going to continue to have less women in positions of power in the C-suite, in government, and all of these other areas. So that's really, it's not just about changing who's making our media, but it's about reaching equity on a much larger scale. And at Real Stories, when I founded the organization, what I saw that existed in the media literacy world was pretty limited. So we started in 2013. And mostly what we saw that existed out there was people that were, deconstructing or critiquing current media, which I think that there's a ton of, that's super valid. But we also want to be able to give folks the tools to create media that is more thoughtful, intentional, and really centers on stories that we don't hear all the time. So for us, media literacy is not just about viewing current media critically and thoughtfully, but it's to create media that reflects their unique point of view. So that is how we look at all of the parts of our filmmaking, is really how can you change this story so that it centers on something that is unique to you, not just centers on something that you've seen so many times and you're sort of regurgitating. So that's sort of the work that we do at Real Stories, and that has only become tightened in this shelter in place where we're all consuming so much media. And even for us as content creators, we're now shifting our whole programming to be another form of media consumption. And so how can we do that in a really intentional way so that everyone who gets to participate really leaves feeling like they can make more wiser choices in what they're seeing, and also be able to, as Robin said, lower their blood pressure if there's conflict around the amount of screen time you're trying to navigate, the amount of, what films people want to watch, what television shows people are watching. What are some ways that you can have those conversations in a really more curious and compassionate way? All right, and why does this all matter? I would love to also hear from some of you guys why you think media literacy matters. But, I think the clearest one is that, representation matters. When we see ourselves represented, when our kids see themselves represented, when our young people see themselves represented, there's no better feeling in the world. And when they are erased, there's no worse feeling in the world. And so we know the representation matters. It's why we connect so strongly to stories that may seem unique, but just because we haven't seen them that often. For us, I think we all know now that media is everywhere. It's not just coming through on our television, computers, our smartphones, all of these other places. And then these next four are really what Robin's going to dive into in the next few slides. So I'm going to have her take it from here around how we can start to be given a better framework around our media consumption and creation.
Yeah. So before doing that, I want to say hi, Jennifer. I haven't seen you in ages, from back when I was at Tilt doing media literacy, hands-on video production with young people in San Francisco.
Hey, lady, great to see you.
Good to see you too.
That was fun.
It was, yes. And we actually did a partnership with About Face and Oasis for Girls, which was a young women's week-long workshop, which was awesome. So we're just gonna, media literacy for me, I feel like I could talk for days and days and days on this. And essentially there are many, I think about 8 different concepts, and we're gonna cover about 4 or 5 of them and try and get as much as we want. But the ones that we thought that would be important to talk about would, one, media art construction, and our media constructs our reality. Different audiences, different understanding of the same media. And then each medium has its own unique aesthetic form. So let's start with the constructions and with that. So one thing, and I apologize if I look down because I have a little cheat sheet here. When I think about all media are constructions and media constructs reality, some of the key words that pop into my mind is really about author and constructiveness. And knowing that we receive nearly all of our knowledge about the world through media. And so what does that mean? And from that, you have to ask yourself, who created this message and where were they standing? What's their background? Who was the writer? Who's the director? Who's the producer? Because they're bringing in all of their knowledge of the world in a way to construct this reality that is there. So certain questions that, and you don't have to have, when you're watching stuff or consuming media and even producing it, you don't have to necessarily have the direct answers for these questions, but it really is about just starting to ask these questions, and these are great things to ask them with, the people you're experiencing media with too. And it's, great conversation starters. What choices did folks have when selecting what they chose to have, both in the filming aspect of it and then editing, especially, I think plays a huge part in the construction of the messaging in there. And then also thinking well, what are some choices that were made that might have been made differently, given if someone else made it? That is something I find myself, I'm constantly, when I'm watching shows now, since I've been, binge watching here and there. And I look at, I'll watch shows that have strong women characters in it, but I still see who wrote it, who directed it, who produced it. And if it's still all men, I'm like, let me think, that makes sense. Or I go in watching the show slightly differently than I would if I saw all women doing it, or at least certain women in that. Sometimes I go back and was all this messaging is a little weird for this woman to be doing that. Or oh, this is so trite, yet it's a strong woman in this sexy outfit that's running around and kicking ass. Then I look back and I'm like, okay, who did this? Who made this stuff? So those are things. And then also looking at a person's, what organization they come from or company they come from, their credentials. So this becomes really important when looking at particularly nonfiction, news media, or things that act as if they're the truth. And who knows, especially now where there is so much noise involved of all all right, what's your credentials in this? Who's paying for this? And we'll talk a little bit about that hopefully at the end. And then what are some various key relationships that people who are in the creation and constructing these messages, they might have some ulterior motives and things. So just understanding their relationship in what the media is, that messaging that's being put out there. That's on the, consumer side of things. As a producer, things that you might want to think about as you're creating. So well, what are you authoring in there? What is your creation? And I think not just that, what's really important is what is informing my decision-making. Why did I make that choice doing that? So that's where that critical and compassion piece really comes in to that, and thinking about okay, well, what's my purpose in that? So, and maybe another question is why am I authoring this as well? So any questions, comments, thoughts around media are constructions, media constructs reality? Does anyone have examples they'd like to share? Story?
Anyone?
Bueller. All right, I guess we could go on to the next one. You could
I know.
You can do it, Esther.
Sorry. Yeah, I know. It's hard to find the little tab on it.
Audience negotiates meaning. I think this is my favorite media literacy concept.
Yeah.
Because where it says no two people experience the same thing the same way. And to me, it's not just a media literacy concept. It's actually, when I learned this, I feel like it helped shape the way that I navigate through the world. It helped me think about how to be in the same, share spaces with people who don't necessarily have shared experiences. It opened up my mind for empathy. It taught me how to listen, and not always have to be right, which was hard for me.
Robin, I'm just gonna I would love it if you would just reintroduce yourself. We've just added a bunch of people to the call, and that way we can.
I know her already.
And then you can also.
Hi, Robin.
Hello.
Just as a reminder, we'd love for this to be an ongoing conversation. So if you have any questions or comments, just either put it in the chat or feel free to unmute yourself so that we can keep this going. And then for those of you that are new, I'm Esther Curl. I'm the founder of Real Stories. We're a filmmaking program for girls and non-binary folks based here in Oakland, but now everywhere, since we're quickly pivoted and are doing online programming. And Robin's been helping us as we sort of develop a hybrid model for some of our more advanced programs moving forward.
So yeah, hi new folks. So you all are coming at the best time. It's my favorite media literacy concept.
Yeah, we'd be so sad if you missed this.
Yes. So with audience negotiation, as I was saying, no two people experience the same thing in the same way. And what a big key word for this that comes to my mind is audience. Obviously, that's what this is, both as yourself as an audience member and then as a producer of media, who is your audience or who might be your audience. Something that's really important, the reason why no people experience the same thing the same way, is that we all interpret media messages based on our own personal experience, and everything is filtered through that. So that's something I just think is a key moment or key thing to think about, that you could be sitting next to somebody and watching the same thing and have a completely different response to that, and takes me.
And I would just say, like, one of the other things I think that's so super amazing about that is you can also see something that you may have, which has happened to me a lot of times, where I'm like, oh, I don't know that I'm going to be able to relate to this film or television at all. And then you see that there's a moment that no matter how different the experience is, which is that you really get you a chance to connect, which is why I always feel like media can be the great, cross connection of humanity in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And then going back, it constructs reality, and if done in a thoughtful manner, it can introduce you to a whole world you had no idea existed. I think that's the magic of it. One thing, as audience, we are affected with media. There's about four ways that media affects us. Physiologically, how does it make us feel? I'm sure we've all seen stuff that has physically made us sick, or like chills from a horror film, like you're physically feeling something from it. Cognitive, how it's making you think in a way. Affective, how is it making you feel, as well as behavioral, how might make you act. Like there's times where it's all like you're watching a comedy and then you feel totally goofy afterwards, so you might play a practical joke on somebody, or you watch something and you're really sad and then you're kind of like bummed out for the rest of the day, or something that evokes anger and you're a little terse with somebody. So these are things too to think about if you're having not such positive interactions with various people that you're sheltering in place with, about how they're responding to some of the media that they're engaging with. Also, something that's really important as with audience negotiating meaning is that it's all contextual. So it really depends on what the environment is, what technology is being used, how people are doing it. You have a different reaction, whether you're able to sit on the couch and watch on a TV versus you're on BART and watching stuff on your phone, as well as the individual. How are you doing that day? Like, did you wake up on the wrong side of the bed? I mean, there are days where I'm all like, oh, I can't stand that show. And then the following day, I'm all like, I love it. It might just show my, bipolarness, but so those are things to think about. And then as a consumer, the questions to ask in deconstructing it is, a few are like, have you ever experienced anything like this before? So ways to try and relate to the content. How close does it come? What you've experienced in real life as opposed to your fantasy life. It could also be your fantasy life. And I think a really important thing is that what did you learn from other people's responses and experiences, both from, I think, watching what's happening on what you're engaging with media-wise, as well as people you're watching with. I mean, I love having discussions about film and television with folks and hearing what they have to say. Because I was like, oh, I never thought about that, because that they're experiencing it totally differently than me. As well as, how many different interpretations could there be in with things? A ton, and how could we hear about them too? So that's I think what's great about this new world, in which there's a lot of ways that we can share and engage, and there's a lot of democracy in media that's out there, particularly social media, and the ability to create, and people are able to engage in conversation about that. And then I think too, really, how can you explain different responses that people might have? You don't have to personally explain, but you can engage in conversation with people about that. And also, I think always going into other people's viewpoints are as valid as mine. With that, I think it's really about trying to understand how other people besides yourself are trying to engage with that. As a producer of media, when you're constructing it, is your message compelling to your audience? One is, who is your audience, and can you have multiple audiences, and what does that look like? And also, is your message including? Is it an inclusive message, or might it possibly be excluding people, and you might not know that? And that's why it's always good to get feedback from people from various perspectives and backgrounds and whatnot when you are producing stuff, and not be reactionary when receiving that kind of feedback. I think being really open-minded. Any thoughts? I saw some people are chatting. I have a hard time talking and looking at the chat window. I guess I could pull it up.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alexandria, which we've talked about before, is once upon a time in Hollywood, felt physically sick after, the end scene. I didn't enjoy any moment of that movie. So I think it is, and I think that's a great one around perspective too, right? I know a lot of people who think it was the best movie from last year, and it's fascinating to see how that the perspective can be so widely different. And and that can also look at the whole system of Hollywood in general, around whose movies get made and where we get to be seen. Riley was talking about, even as a kid, there were television shows she couldn't watch because
it's too scary.
And and I think we can all imagine those times. Anybody else have anything around two people experiencing the same thing in a different way?
I'll contribute one.
Yeah.
When I watched Boys Don't Cry, I did feel very sick for the rest of the day. Basically, sick to my stomach, more like sick to my mind, my heart. And for those who don't know, it's about a trans boy. Am I right?
Yeah, it's trans
Yeah, trans
F
man.
to, yeah. F to
Yeah.
man.
Trans man. Yeah.
Yeah, female to male, and basically like how they're victimized. It's like kind of like how I would just wrap that one up for everybody if you haven't seen it. And it to say that it ruined my day is to put it lightly. You know, it stuck with me for a long time, and that's the kind of film where, you know, it's so thoroughly important, but it's also just like you know, destroying. Anyway, that was my experience with that. And I don't know if that was because of my own, I don't think that was because of my own experience in the way that I, as an audience member, you know, negotiated meaning with it, but maybe it was just so intensively emotional and so well done that it really just got me and taught me at the same time.
Yeah.
I'll add a little bit. This is Tara. Jennifer, I equally, I agree with you. That movie was so heart-wrenching, and I think that it would be done so much different if it had been directed by a man. So, because Kimberly Pierce directed it, it was just, I think that there's a really interesting thing to think about, like a different lens if it had been directed by someone different. That her compassionate lens towards the character of Brandon within that film, I think, brought forward a very different level of emotion and empathy towards that character. I think about that film quite a bit when it comes to like different perspectives in terms of like who directs your media, like what you were saying, Robin, and like what the outcome of that could be. And I know that Kimberly has talked quite a bit about that film, so there might be some really good interviews that you can look up about that perspective of, you know, how she constructed that film. I also think it's interesting, the reference that you brought up of Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I chose not to watch that movie.
Me too.
And just because I just take issue with the director in terms of just on a personal level. And so, you know, I've admired his work in the past, but it just wasn't something that appealed to me. And so it's like this missing part of the conversation that a lot of people have experienced that movie. And I've heard amazing things, people that, you know, are friends and I totally respect, think it's the best movie ever. And then I've also heard the opposite. And then same thing that's happening right now with that Tiger King phenomenon. I asked quite a bit of friends because I kept seeing so many people were posting about it, and for me as a viewer, like any sort of animal abuse, it really is something that I just don't want to see. And so I asked several people about that, like how, you know, I don't know if I could handle seeing that, even though the shock value of what everybody is talking about and wanting to be part of that conversation was very enticing. I again chose not to watch it. So I think that that's an interesting thing that I think about in terms of media consumption, because you miss out. It's almost like you're not part of the water cooler talk if you're not watching some of these things and participating in that conversation. But I think that the choice of not participating and watching some of these kinds of media is a layer of media literacy that is super valid.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that that's a huge part of, especially if you have the ability to be conscious around these decisions and the choices that you make. You know, I think when we're younger, we're like, oh, I'll just go see that movie with my friends.
Absolutely. Yeah. That, you know, as an adult, you have more of that opportunity.
And I think that's an opportunity we can also give to the next generation, right? To like, you know, that there's nothing wrong with the choices that you make, but if you are opting to like protect your heart or your, you know,
or your heart, your mind, your physical thing. So Riley, I have not seen Land Before Time.
I haven't seen it either.
So it's a dinosaur movie, right?
I have something.
Very reductive, Robin.
Sorry, Alexandra.
I have something. Hi. I remember when I heard the both of you talk about media literacy before, I saw a couple of people mention about not watching Game of Thrones, and Game of Thrones for me was something I made the conscious choice to watch because I was like interested, but I had a lot of fundamental issues with it that I processed. I believe, Esther, I've heard you talk about before, like, you know, sometimes we will choose to indulge in things that maybe aren't, you know, subconsciously the best for us, but as long as we're, you know, taking time to acknowledge and process, like, I'm just curious where that line is where we take in the types of things like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Game of Thrones, or like, you know, Tiger King type thing, knowing full well what it is. Like, how do you kind of work through that and process that?
Well, I think for myself, like, there's definitely the days like I'm watching shit to disengage in some ways, turn my mind off. But there's still the part, and this is like my 20 years of doing media literacy, where this stuff is so ingrained in me. It's still, those questions are still asked, but sometimes I'm all like, I'm just going to let that be, because I don't feel like getting angry right now, or sad, or whatnot. Or I'm all like, or I turn it off.
Yeah.
Because if I recognize that it's like bringing up the certain things that that at that point I'm seeing are negative, like whether it's a physiological, cognitive, affective, or behavioral, then I'm like, okay, then it's having an adverse effect on me, and I need to disengage. And then there's other times like I could sit and watch something where it's all like, okay, I know this is going on, and I'm gonna like suspend that for a bit and know that I'm also going to be watching other stuff that does hit the checkpoints that make me feel like I'm a responsible media consumer in ways, but also, you know, understanding it and being able to then support folks who are creating stuff that don't align with the status quo of our current media industrial complex. So with it, but also not always being so hard on oneself. So they're called guilty pleasures.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think like it depends on also the lens, right? So, you know, when I'm watching media, you know, I have two hats. I play like my own world, right? But I also, you know, not only in the work that I do, but in my own household of raising kids, just being able to have that like open and conversation around, you know, this is reality television. You know, both my husband and I are filmmakers. We, you know, have worked in mass media, so we can deconstruct really quickly. Like, that's scripted. Those people don't own that house. That's, you know, and then I also have, you know, the added privilege of having a teenage daughter who's a child of color, and so really like looking through the lens of her eyes of like when she's being seen and when she's not being seen, right? And so like that's the tools that we try to give at Real Stories, is like, you know, as Robin talked about in the other, of like what stories are missing from all of this, right? So if you're watching stuff and we're, you know, even if it's something that might feel like it's got a strong female character, if that still is only like a strong white female character, like where do these other stories go? So I think it is like, you know, Allie knows I have indulged in the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills at times because I don't care about any of those people, right? But I know that it's all like fluff, right? Like I know that, and so I think that's really, especially in like navigating YouTube and TikTok and all of the social media and all of the influencers that we have, and how much influence they have on our young people, is like, how can they, you know, and really like seeing how many of our young folks, you know, one of the reasons why they love these social media influencers is because it feels like it's a real relationship, right? Versus like a celebrity relationship. And what does that really mean? And just trying to have like a healthy, curious conversation around some of that stuff as well.
Right. And that makes me think of all like, what can you do to like not work on not being judgy on what other people might like at times?
Are you responding to my ew comment?
No, I'm responding to my own judginess about me.
Just kidding.
I'm all like, oh, I'm judgy. Like, why did I watch Sabrina last night? and but just also like use it as an opportunity in engaging in conversation of like, well, like why do you like this, but not like a why you like that, why you gotta be liking that. And this is like, I think from years of me working with young people from so many different backgrounds, and like an obvious, like being introduced to things, I was like, tell me why you like it, because I've never even heard of that thing.
Yeah.
And then I'll go check it out. And sometimes I'm like, oh no, that's really cool. And other times I'm like, that I'm not that audience and I'm okay with that. Or yeah, I'm feeling it now. So I think there's like a lot of things that, you know, we don't have to, we could not be so harsh on ourselves in some things, as well as opening up conversation with other folks with that. Yeah, does anyone else have other, this I feel like I could like, Jewel.
Okay, so I was listening to what you guys were saying, and my thing is of course, you know, I'm African American, so the film industry underrepresents us.
Yep.
And every time that you turn on a TV or you watch a movie with a black cast, then it's always drugs, sex, you know, criminal activity, killings, you know, and that's what's being seeped into the community, which subliminally really tears our community apart, because they honestly, because what you see is what you think other people is seeing in you. So it's just like, oh, so it's cool, you know, to play like a gangster, or you know what I mean, it's cool, you know what I mean, to wear skimpy clothes and, you know, dance with my booty hanging out, and, you know, all of this type of thing, because that's the only place in which I'm going to actually mean something. You know, so my thing is that I like to change. I would like to change that aspect and that view. And it's not necessarily to make it into a heroic situation, or a dime situation in which, just like you had what was that? The woman with NASA. What was the name of that movie? It was black women who,
Hidden Figures.
Thank you, Hidden Figures. And that I mean, like the title in itself, you know, is kind of like
Telling.
yeah, and it's crazy, because it's just like, do you know how many Hidden Figures we actually have here?
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, like, when you think about that, and it's just like, yet, you know, we're always bottled down. Even going to like museums, I deal with for 27 years I have been serving a community in an educational realm, nonprofit realm, and that includes from 0 to 99. So you know, looking at points of view of different people, like the self-hatred is unbelievable.
It's deep.
You know, it is. It's very deep, because
and intergenerational.
Right, and because it's like, you know, when I say, you know, to them, you know, well, you know, you're a descendant of Africa. You know, I'm not African. You know, and I'm just like, that's only because of what's been placed in your head psychologically. You know, that being African is the worst thing ever. You know, and it's just like, it's not. You know, so it's, I educate them on what they need to be proud of being black. And that is a very hard chore, more than what you think.
It's hard. When I worked at Youth Uprising, I was so fortunate to work with the multimedia coordinator there, did a wonderful job working with the young people in Deep East Oakland. And we were like, how do you flip your script? And like, yeah, there's all that shit on TV, but that's not your story. That's not who you are. We've seen who you are. Yeah, you could be tough, but you have this heart that's that why you just keep hiding it. So yeah, and getting more of those stories out.
Even if they try to read a book, this is what's crazy. If they read a book, it's just like their friends is like, why are you doing that? Kind of like you said with the movie, the judgmental, realm of why you watching that, and it's just like, oh, and excuse my language, really, like, oh, you trying to be white, and it's just like everything in which is there they can actually benefit from is frowned upon on and put as something else, which is just like, oh no, Black people don't do that. So I mean, growing up myself, looking at the film, I mean, like, all I seen was white people on TV. That's all that I seen. I didn't see any Black person of any good representative. If you seen a Black person, they was a slave, or they was a mammy, in some type of capacity of negativity and oppressiveness.
Right.
So you didn't really understand, and you didn't see it. I mean, like, it took me a long time, years, to actually understand that Egypt was in Africa.
Right. Yeah,
that's crazy, right?
And Jewel, you missed the part we were talking about how media constructs reality, because we get most of our media messages, all of our like knowledge around the world around media. So that's a good example. And I really appreciate you sharing your experiences. And we'll chat next week about stuff, because I want to hear more about the work that you do. And I also want to be mindful of time, because we only got 5 more minutes. I had a few other things on here, but we might need to kind of, I think, wrap up. But I'm going to just run through these things real quickly.
Do you want me to move to the next slide?
Yeah, go to the next slide. So one thing too to think about, each medium has its own unique aesthetic form. So, our engagement with media differs from device to device. So we communicate differently depending if we're texting, email, phone, or Facebook messaging, or posting on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I don't even know how to use TikTok. I'm way too old to be using TikTok. And then with the unique aesthetic form, it's all like, well, what are you noticing, and how people are communicating through that, and how are you responding to that, as social media has become so reactionary too. And being really mindful of like what platforms and tools are being used, like how are you engaging in media, are a few things to think about. Also, I'll be sending out this video, as well as kind of a little handout that has all these questions broken up, so you can then take it with you and share it with your communities as well. And then you could also reach out to me too. I can throw in my email address in the
and we'll follow up with everyone who registered on Eventbrite with your email, Robin. And
okay, well, I'll put it in here for folks who want to grab it first. And then the final slide, I don't know, is it the final slide?
It's sort of the final slide.
Yeah. This is like, each medium has its own commercial implications. This could be like a whole 12-year course on this. So particularly now, it's really thinking about who's in control of the creation and transmission of the messages. Like, this is particularly now is something to definitely think about. Where is this? Who has the money? Who's throwing the money down for this? Who is it serve? Why are they sending it, and how do you know? and this is a big deal in the whole like fake news thing, as well as how certain leaders are leveraging mainstream media to send their messages, even though it can be all over the place. Who's served by it? Who benefits? Who from the messages? Is it the public? Is it private interests or individuals, institutions? Those are things, you know, to think about. Who owns your media? Who owns the messaging that goes in that? And yeah, I could do. I mean, I think I did a whole like 3-hour lecture. Not lecture.
We can add another one.
Yeah, we could go into a whole thing
And I
on
think,
that.
especially working with young folks, I always think this is so important because of all of these free platforms we get, right? And there's a lot of ways media has been democratized, but like, you know, there is the cost of like a lack of privacy and they're not having all of your information and just not that you shouldn't use them, but just having a knowledge that like Instagram, Facebook, Snapchat, they're taking everything that you're utilizing and then figuring out a way to market to you. And so, you know, to Jules' point earlier of like when you only see things that are consistently like reflected back in a really negative way, it's also because they're trying to market to you. And so you're really limited in what you're getting to see, right? It becomes this like silo of what you see in your feeds. And just having an opportunity to have that conversation with young people, I think is always fascinating because they want a lot of autonomy, as they deserve autonomy and agency, and just saying like, you know, just recognize that when you are using these free things, they're taking something for you that and they turn around and sell and make a whole lot of money off of it. So like,
and then don't be shocked when you see on Facebook an ad that is something you want. That's target marketing.
Yeah.
And a lot of money, a lot of money goes on in the back end of that. It's insane. You're like, wow, there are people who are hungry and don't have houses and you're spending money on this. Crazy. So, yeah, I feel like we could, you know, easily have another hour session. Future. Oh, and I think most importantly is that we really wanted to have people walk away from this feeling like they can like be more active participants in consuming and producing media. And there are a few different tests that you can take or question as you are engaging with media. One is a like old-time favorite of the Bechtel test, which I can't remember off the top of my head all the questions.
Yeah. Two female characters, they both have to have names and talk to each other about something other than a man, which is horrifying how low that bar is and how few films pass it.
And then Esther, if you can share the link too, because you had that one of these other tests that kind of look at different points. There's a great one that's like specifically for women of color that focuses on that. Like there's like probably like 10 different tests that kind of each have their own niche. And those are just good ways to like be a little bit more more thoughtful on how you are interacting and engaging with media, as well as if you know have young family members at home, or if you work with young people and these are just things you could start questioning. It's about planting seeds so people could start. I mean, that's what about media literacy that I love so much, is that it as I said earlier to folks, it gave me a way. I knew I felt all these things growing up and watching the news. I grew up in DC and during Reagan Bush, and it was I always was all like and it gave me a framework and language to help me really think through about all these messages that I was getting, and I was all like, oh shit, okay, this is so that all of, I feel these are tools and questions to help you frame and have agency in how you engage with media, and that it's not what's known as a hypodermic needle effect, where it's the media is doing this thing to you, but it's way more complex. and that as a consumer and producer of media, you actually have something to contribute and have the ability to change, particularly with all of these tools out there. And for all folks, who are working with young people and just, planting the seeds and having conversation and listening to them about how they're engaging with it. So that's my sense. I don't know if anyone has any questions, comments, gripes, moans. I know we're at 8:03. I need to eat dinner. But yeah, any last minute or last thoughts that people have?